يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى نحمده ونستعينه ونثني عليه ونؤمن به ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف بريته ومبلغ رسالاته العبد المؤيد الرسول المسدد المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل في الجنة وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. We begin this first Friday khutbah by reminding all of you and myself to maintain the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll continue inshallah our discussion on the topic of knowledge, this chapter that the author of 40 hadith had begun. And the chapter had started with a narration that we went over in the past couple of weeks with regards to how the Prophet defined who an allama is, who a person of knowledge is. So when people had gathered around this person who they assumed was a person of knowledge, and they assumed he is al-allama, the Prophet asked them, وَمَا الْعَلَّامَ, what is that definition for you? They said the person who knows about the lineage and the person who knows about the literature and the poetry and so on and so forth. The Prophet responded, he said, ذَاكَ عِلْمٌ لَا يَضُرُّ مَنْ جَهِلَهُ وَلَا يَنْفَعُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ. That is the type of knowledge that if someone does not have, it's not the end of the world for him. And it's the type of knowledge that if he does have, it's not going to make the world for him. It's not a make or break situation. ثم قال النبي إنما العلم ثلاثة. He said knowledge is of three types. آية محكمة وفريضة عادلة أو فريضة عادلة أو سنة قائمة. He said these are the three categories of knowledge. وما خلاهن فهو فضل. He said anything that comes beyond these فهو فضل. It's the type of knowledge, if you have it, it's great. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. Of course, knowledge is something that Islam has emphasized quite a bit, and you open up books of hadith like Al-Kafi, the chapter on knowledge is such a long chapter. Many of us will never read through the whole chapter in our whole lives. That's how long it is. But so knowledge has a lot of emphasis in Islam. When the Prophet says, وَمَا خَلَاهُنَّ, outside of these three, is extra, outside of these three, is good if you have it. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. Of course, the Ahlul Bayt are not trying to denote or negate the importance of all the types of sciences and knowledges that we find around us today, yes? What the Prophet is trying to explain is that at its very core, the thing that every single human being needs to know is this type of knowledge. This is what the Prophet is saying, yes? It's not trying to say that if you're going to be a doctor, you can be a mediocre doctor. It's not important for you to have full knowledge of your medical field. That's not what the Prophet is saying, yes? He's saying the type of knowledge that's foundational, that every single human being has to have. If the human being doesn't have this type of knowledge, then he's going to run into foundational issues, these three. So the first of these the Prophet referred to, and we went through this discussion, that the first of these correlates with the world known as alamul aql. And hence it relates to the belief system of the human being. And we got into why is it that the Prophet referred to this type of knowledge, to the aqa'id, to the belief system of the human being, as ayatun muhkama. And the author said the reason behind this is because all of these knowledges and all of this vocabulary and terminology that we hear about the Day of Judgment, about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the angels, all these things we hear. Tawheed and the sifat and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of these things, this is all ayah. These are all supposed to be signs. These are all supposed to be things that point you in the right direction. And so the Prophet is trying to denote that if someone doesn't look at this knowledge as a sign and rather sees it as the final goal, then he's not walking in my footsteps. Because the knowledge, the terminology, the vocabulary, that wasn't the goal for the Prophet. This was a sign that was supposed to point you where? Point you towards the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His greatness and so on and so forth. If you walked away with just learning some vocabulary and some terminology, what you learned was a sign. You didn't learn what the sign was pointing towards. What you were engaging with was the stop sign, as we discussed last week, yes? You didn't engage with the reality, that the sign was actually pointing to. Okay, so the author said, knowledge, this is how it works. If you take it in, but you don't actually act on it, you don't actually implement it, meaning you're staring at the stop sign, you're not paying attention to what it's actually trying to communicate to you, he makes the claim that then knowledge becomes a barrier. Knowledge then becomes an obstacle in your path with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is very important. So I sit here and as a follower of Ahlul Bayt and I say, well, Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me with the love of the Ahlul Bayt and blessed me with the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, yes? Sometimes you see online people will comment, my greatest pride is that I'm Shia. My greatest pride, yes, is that I'm the follower of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Okay, great, that's your greatest pride. Wonderful. So the teachings of this Imam and this Ahlul Bayt, you are, as they would say in Arabic, awla. You are more expected to act on these teachings now because you were exposed to these teachings a lot more than anybody else. Yes, someone from Ahlul Sunnah, and this is a common belief in some denominations of Ahlul Sunnah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has some form of physical existence. Believe it or not, this is a belief, yes? Some Sunni denominations, okay? That person can believe that because he doesn't have, according to you, the blessing of being exposed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. Okay, great. So you've been exposed to the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. The pure Muhammadi Islam is what you say, yes? That's the one you always say. That this one is the real one. Okay, great. You know what all of that means? The more you speak of this blessing that God gave to you, the more your responsibility increases. So this person, if he shows up on the Day of Judgment and he's not doing everything properly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take it easier on him compared to you who had the Ahlul Bayt in his life. The Shia and the followers of the Ahlul Bayt only do the first part very well. I'm Shia, I'm proud, I'm this, I'm okay, great. It's not bad to be proud. That's why in our azkar we read, Alhamdulillahi alladhi ja'alana min al-mutamassikina bi wilayati Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. It's not a bad thing to be thankful for that blessing, and it is truly a blessing. The one who doesn't follow the Ahlul Bayt. Sometimes people think following Ahlul Bayt is just something happened 1400 years ago. No, it impacts your understanding of the faith right now. Every second you want to understand God, you have to go ask Ahlul Bayt, how do you understand God? Yes? Every second you want to pray, you have to go ask Ahlul Bayt, how did the Prophet used to pray from your opinion? Depends who you ask. You ask one group, they say you put your hands down. You ask another group, they say no, you have to put your hands up while it makes a big difference. Okay, so you were exposed to their teachings. What does that mean? That means more responsibility. That means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects more from you. And this is why the Quran makes this beautiful point in Surah Al-Ahzab with regards to the wives of the Prophet. The Quran says, verse 32 from Surah 33, Ya Nisa an-Nabi, O wives of the Prophet, لَسْتُنَّ كَأَحَدٍ مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ إِنِ اتَّقَيْتُنَّ. You guys are not like the other women. Not like the other women, why? Because they come from like a particular tribe or background? No, it's not because of any of these. In fact, they came from a multitude of different backgrounds, yes? So why? It says, if you guys apply taqwa, you're not like any of the other women. Meaning, if the other women have taqwa, it's different from you having taqwa. Because your impact is greater. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's expectation of you is a greater expectation. Hence, you'll hear many times in our communities, people will say, if you're Sayyid, you'll be rewarded twice. If you're Sayyid, you will be punished twice if you did something wrong. The verses of the Quran tell us not just Sayyid, not Sayyid. At the very least, even the one who's attributed to the Ahlul Bayt. The wives of the Prophet. Were they all amazing individuals? No, in our school of thought, we don't believe that. But why does the Quran say, لَسْتُنَّ كَأَحَدٍ مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ? You guys are different. Because they're connected to the prophets. Because when they do things, people say, the person who lived his life or her life with the Prophet did this. Now you take this. I ask you, the wives of the Prophet, were they Sadat? Many of them weren't Sadat, if any. I don't remember all the details right now. Yes, but if any. Okay, so the Quran is still saying rewarded twice, punished twice. What does this mean? This means when you're connected, people attribute you to the faith, then this means there's greater responsibility for you. Hence the Quran says in verse 34, وَاذْكُرْنَ مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Remember those verses that were revealed in your own houses. I can sit there and say I disobeyed the Quran. The person who the verses were revealed in his house or in her house. What is she going to say on the Day of Judgment? What am I going to say? Who's closer to the Ahlul Bayt? Who's more connected to the Ahlul Bayt? This pride comes with responsibility. And if someone doesn't embrace that responsibility and a lack of embracing it turns into a barrier in terms of his relationship or her relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first of these sciences that without it you're going to be lost in life, every human being needs, ayatun muhkama. The belief system that is assigned towards a greater reality. That greater reality you need to embrace. Yes? Now if someone says, well, I want to embrace this reality. I want to be amongst those who doesn't just gain knowledge, that this knowledge truly seeps into me. This is where that narration of the first Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, comes into the picture. Why? Because he said, Ya talib al-ilm. This is the narration we began last week and we went through portions of it. He said, Ya talib al-ilm, inna al-ilma dhu fadha'ila kathira. Knowledge has many virtues. It comes with many virtues. So the Imam said, if you have knowledge, these are the signs of it. To the extent you have these signs is to the extent that knowledge is actually seeped into you, has actually become part of who you are. So he said, فَرَأْسُهُ التَّوَاضُعُ. The biggest thing that stands out with knowledge is humility. These are all question marks for you and I. These are all questions. I'm proud to be a Shia. Okay, now let's see how many of these signs have made its way into our hearts. He said, فَرَأْسُهُ التَّوَاضُعُ. وَعَيْنُهُ الْبَرَاءَةُ مِنَ الْحَسَدِ. The eye of knowledge is that it never gets jealous. وَأُذُنُهُ الْفَهْمِ. And its ear is understanding, meaning he listens to actually understand. He doesn't listen to argue. He doesn't listen to see what is your point, how can I counter your point. You know how many of the problems in our communities be solved if this was how we approached conversations? وَأُذُنُهُ الْفَهْمِ. His ear, understanding. وَلِسَانُهُ الصِّدْقِ. When he speaks, it is truthful. وَحِفْظُهُ الْفَحْصِ وَقَلْبُهُ حُسْنُ النِّيَّةِ. Many of these we went through. I'm going to move on to the ones that we didn't go through. وَرِجْلُهُ. This is the new one. Its leg, ziyaratul ulama. Its leg, the leg of knowledge, is ziyaratul ulama, meaning this person goes and sits with people who have knowledge. He goes and he seeks this knowledge from them. وَهِمَّتُهُ as-salama. His main concern in life, if he's truly a knowledgeable individual, is as-salama, is his spiritual health. وَحِكْمَتُهُ. And his wisdom, al-wara'. His wisdom shows itself by staying away from sin. There's a lot of people in the world, they claim wisdom. A lot of people in the world, you sit down, they're very eloquent. You should do this, you should do that. Once I heard this one sentence, I heard that one sentence. Then the Imam is saying, if he truly has wisdom, if he's a wise person, that will show when he comes across haram. Does his hands start to shake and tremble when he comes across haram? In the sense of, does he feel fearful of this? If he does, he has wisdom. If he doesn't, he can sound as eloquent as he wants to sound. He doesn't have wisdom. That's vocabulary he memorized. It's information he memorized. وَمُسْتَقَرُّهُ النَّجَاةِ وَمَرْكَبُهُ الْوَفَاء وَصِلَاحُهُ لِينُ الْكَلِمَةِ. His weapon, what he uses to interact with other people, لِينُ الْكَلِمَةِ, is speech that is lenient. Silah, weapon, you would expect something what? Harsh. It says, وَصِلَاحُهُ لِينُ الْكَلِمَةِ. When he wants to speak to others, he speaks to them in a lenient manner. وَسَيْفُهُ الرِّضَى, and his sword is being pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided for him. وَقَوْسُهُ الْمُدَارَاتِ, I want to continue. He says, وَزَادَهُ الْمَعْرُوفِ, and that thing that he keeps piling up, zad, is that thing you pile up for when the worst of times are going to come. Yes? Zad is that thing you pile up when you want to go on a trip. Yes? You start packing stuff because you know once you get on the trip, you're not going to have access to these resources. He says, وَزَادَهُ الْمَعْرُوفِ, that thing that he keeps piling up on, keeps saying, we're going to need more of this, we're going to need more of this, is his good deeds. He doesn't sit there and say, I prayed, it's okay, it's enough. He knows there's going to come a time, يَوْمُ الْفَقْرِ, he knows there's going to come a day of poverty, a day where he needs these good deeds heavily. So he does what on them? He keeps stacking up, keeps piling up these good deeds. وَزَادُهُ الْمَعْرَفَةِ وَرَفِيقُهُ مَحَبَّةُ الْأَخْيَارِ, and his friendship is the friendship of good individuals. This person, knowledge has seeped into his heart. How many characteristics did the Imam mention? Nearly 15, roughly, characteristics. That's 15 question marks for you and I. That's 15 question marks of how much of this do I find in myself? Yes? Okay. The author of 40 hadith then says, after narrating this narration, he says, when you look at these characteristics, if you don't find them within you, this is a red flag. This is a major issue. He says, لا يظن علماء المفاهيم والمصطلحات والعبارات. Don't let the people who've memorized some terminology and vocabulary think that their hearts have been enlightened with knowledge unless and only if they have these characteristics. If I don't have these, then yes, I sat in the majlis and I heard some information. Okay, good. It didn't go deeper than my eyes and my ears. Okay, this is the first type of knowledge. Let us move on to the second type of knowledge. Another loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. He said, first is your belief system, ayatun muhkama. Number two, farida adila. That is that obligation that is moderate. This is referring to ilm al-akhlaq. This is referring to the characteristics of the human being, that every single one of them, if it's a virtue, the scientists of akhlaq, the scholars of akhlaq say every positive virtue is a moderate version of two extremes. Yes? Being brave has two extremes. One extreme is this person is just completely, yes, cares about no threat at all. He just moves into threat. Yes? Other extreme is he's extremely scared. Somewhere in between these two, you will find what? Bravery. Generosity, between two extremes. Modesty, between every single, this is at least the claim of these scholars, every single akhlaqi virtue is going to be a moderate version of between two extremes. Hence the Prophet says, Farida adila. Adila means what? Moderate. Adila means it falls somewhere in the middle. This is number two. It says, why did the Prophet call the third type of knowledge ilmul fiqh, what you're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis? Why did he call this sunnah qa'imah? He said he called this sunnah qa'imah because it's one of those things that you have to look at the sunnah to learn it. You can't come up with it with your own mind. This is very important. What does this mean? This means, brothers and sisters, the details of our faith, you can't sit there and come up with them. You have to go to a source, and that source tells you, this is how you pray. But these details don't make sense to me. Why is it in my wudu, when I'm washing downwards, I can't go upwards? Trust me, that's a very good question. I have no idea. I have no idea. Maybe one day, if we see the Prophet, we'll ask him this question, along with thousands of other questions that we don't know the answer to. Yes? Why is it in your Salaat, for example, first you have to do your ruku, then your sujood? Why is it you have to say subhanallah at least 3 times? Why not 2 times? Why is it this many rak'at? Why is this? Why? We don't know. But just because we don't know doesn't mean you can dismiss these details. The Prophet said this is sunnah qa'imah. This is the part where you come and ask and you submit yourself. The belief system, you ask questions, you challenge, you say, I don't believe in this, I don't know about that. What's your proof? All of that makes sense. Yes? When it comes to the sunnah, when it comes to how am I supposed to do this and that, that's the part you have to have someone else tell you. This is why Al-Imam As-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he has a beautiful narration. He said, Deenullahi la yusabu bil-uqul. He said, the religion of Allah, you can't make sense of it. You can't figure it out just with your own intellects. Yes, when you learn what the faith is, retrospectively, you can come back in hindsight and say, why is this salat 2 rakats or 3 rakats? Maybe it's because of this, maybe it's because of that. First, you establish what the religion wants from you. Then you try to do what? Figure out what the philosophy is, what is the reason, what is it. This you can do, no problem. But from the very beginning, I don't think this should be like this, I don't think that should be like that. Well, who are you? Who said you have knowledge? Who said I have knowledge? We don't have knowledge. Why is Islamic dress code set up in this way and that way? There's no problem in asking why. We can discuss, see if the Ahlul Bayt have shared the wisdom, haven't shared the wisdom, what's the philosophy, sometimes they have, sometimes they may not have. Either way. But then if I'm going to use that, say, well, it doesn't make sense to me. So this is sunnah. This is the part where you look at them, you do exactly as they do. This is not the part where you apply intellect in the sense of, I have to see if it makes sense to me. I have to see if this one is truly, you know what people tell, I don't want to follow faith blindly. Follow faith blindly. Go figure out if this Quran is the miracle of God, and go figure out if God exists, and go figure out if this Ahlul Bayt speak on behalf of the Prophet. Okay? Once you've established all of that, don't speak to me anymore about following faith blindly. There's no faith in the world that when it comes to the details, you are expected to know the reason behind every little thing behind it. Doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's not faith anymore. Because faith means sometimes you don't know why you're doing something. Faith means, with some of the details, you don't know why you're doing it. You're doing it because he told you to do it. We don't have that type of knowledge. The Quran doesn't say, come and do this, come and do that. Oh, don't worry, I'll tell you exactly what. Sometimes it does. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you do it because I'm in charge. You don't believe I'm in charge, that's your belief system. That's where you have to go figure that out, right? You think I'm not your God, you think the Quran is not a miracle? Those are all valid questions. That's for where? That's for your belief system. Here is sunnah qa'imah. Here is that part where you come and you do as they told you to do. Sometimes they've also told you the reason. Many times they have not told you and I the reason. I'm talking about details. Yes, anyone can come and look at fasting and say, fasting in general, you can come up with a wisdom and a philosophy behind it. Yes, no problem. If I were to ask you a couple of questions about the details, you wouldn't be able to answer it. Why from dusk until dawn? Or dawn until dusk? Why not 5 minutes before it? Why not 5 minutes after it? How come some sins break your fast? Other sins that might even be bigger don't break your fast. If you eat something, yes, or for example, certain acts you engage in, your fast is batil. If you backbite about someone, backbiting, that hadith says it's worse than this and worse than that. Yes, all these narrations we have about backbiting. Doesn't break your fast. How does this work? Deenullahi la yusabu bil-uqul. These details, they have wisdom behind them. We don't know the wisdom behind them. Yes, the general ideas, the general concepts, sure. And one of the, and I'm going to say this inshallah, we'll end this khutbah. One of the biggest mistakes that parents make when they're trying to preach religion to their children is to try to get into this mode of presenting a reason behind every detailed ruling in Islam. Sheikh, my son is struggling with this, so can you tell him why we do this? Sure, sometimes we have in Ahlul Bayt have shared in their narrations the wisdom behind a particular ruling. Can we have a discussion about the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on? In general, we can have these discussions. But the detailed reason behind every ruling, nobody has that. It's thousands of rules in Islam, we don't know the particular wisdom behind it. Detailed rulings. So now this parent from the age of whatever was telling this child, no, listen, your religion is not, it's not telling you to follow it blindly. So what does that mean? That means every time we want to do something, we need to know why. That was the wrong interpretations. Good intentions, wrong approach. Yes, your religion doesn't want you to follow it blindly. But that means when it comes to your belief system and your foundations, you ask as many questions as you like. No problem whatsoever. We don't believe in this thing that sometimes other faiths and other religions preach. Yes, just take a leap of faith. Faith and knowledge and intellect don't even mesh with one another. It's a different world. We don't believe in that. Okay? That's following religion blindly. But when these foundations are established and you said this Quran is a miracle of God, and you said this Ahl Bayt are people who know what they're talking about, then the details, sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know. There's nothing wrong with asking why. There is a problem with asking why on a conditional basis. Meaning what? Meaning if you make it make sense to me, I'll do it. If it doesn't make sense to me, I'm out of here. A person who practices faith like this will never be able to practice Islam. Never. It's impossible. Because there are thousands of rulings in Islam that we don't know the reason behind it. And Islam has not shied away from this at all. Islam is very open about this idea. Hence, the Prophet, when he came to this third type of knowledge, he said, Sunnah qa'ima. This is the part where you literally copy-paste. You look at what the Ahl Bayt do, and you say, I submit myself to what they are doing. This is the third type of knowledge. Inshallah, next week we're going to talk a little bit more about implementing all three of these knowledges within our lives, because when you look in our communities, even ourselves, you will find that within a community of 10,000 people, 15,000 people, any size of a community, yes, you will find people will fall under three categories. Each of those categories is a category who has emphasized one of these types of knowledge more than the other ones. Has stuck to one type of knowledge and made religion only about one of these three categories, instead of understanding that the Ahl Bayt wanted all three of these categories in our lives. That's a very practical discussion we'll have inshallah the following week. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. أثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. ثم أصلي وأسلم على نجيبه وجليله وحافظ سره الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأراضين بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على علي أمير المؤمنين وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى سبطي نبي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في أرضك الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. We begin the second Friday khutbah by reminding all of you and myself to maintain the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We reached verses 38 to 40 from Suratul Waqi'ah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described for us first the situation of the first category, as-sabiqun ulaika al-muqarrabun. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala moved on to ashabul yamin, the people who their book of deeds will be granted to their right hand. And he said, ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْآخَرِينَ, a large group of the previous ummahs and a large group from this ummah as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala went through the blessings that they would benefit from in heaven. And we said the main difference between Ashabul Yamin and As-Sabiqun is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to us about the special relationship that He has with the First group. The second group also benefits from many of the blessings of heaven. But the Quran called the first group, أُولَٰئِكَ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ. I have a special relationship with them. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is moving on to the third group. وَأَصْحَابُ الشِّمَالِ مَا أَصْحَابُ الشِّمَالِ. As it relates to the people of the left hand, of course the Quran tells us that on that day, people who are going to get a failing grade, their book of deeds is granted to them in their left hand. And other verses of the Quran tell us behind their back. And so scholars have said in their left hand behind their back is where their book is given to them. وَأَصْحَابُ الشِّمَالِ مَا أَصْحَابُ الشِّمَالِ. The people of the left hand, what a situation they're going to have. مَا أَصْحَابُ الشِّمَالِ means their situation is severe. And we talked about this before. Every group that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of, He says their situation is severe. Either severe in goodness or severe, God forbid, in what? In the misery that they're going to experience. This is what the Quran tells us. وَأَصْحَابُ الشِّمَالِ مَا أَصْحَابُ الشِّمَالِ. So the Quran in just a couple verses explains to us what their situation is going to be like. فِي سَمُومٍ وَحَمِيمٍ. There are burning winds that are coming their way. Yes? Because if you were to picture a place of comfort, you would picture a cool breeze. So the Quran says the people of hellfire, fi samumin, the opposite of them. Fi samumin wa hamim, and boiling water, wa dhillin min yahmum, and they have shade upon them. Over there it's talking about shade too. It says here they have shade too. But that shade is min yahmum, it's from a burning smoke. Yes? So it's not a cool, comforting shade. Wa dhillin min yahmum. And this shade, la baridin wala kareem. It's not a cool shade, which is the whole point of a shade. Wala kareem, and it's not giving, it's not forgiving. It's not the type of shade that gives you anything. It's the type of shade that takes away from you, takes away from your comforts. Okay, so we read these verses of the Quran, and the Quran didn't even talk about here about punishment, this, that. This is just 3 verses, 4 verses, very short, concise description that you understand these people who are in the midst of bliss and blessing, these people on the other hand, in the midst of the type of situation that the Quran is just touching on. Okay, so brothers and sisters, these verses are scary verses. When someone reads these verses, they feel scared. And many Muslims, if you left it up to them, they would love to remove these verses from the Quran. They would love to not have these verses in the Quran. They would love for the Quran only to talk about what? Only to talk about heaven. But alhamdulillah, because we went through this discussion during this arba'een, you know this already. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this fear, the fear of the consequences of your deeds, if that fear is genuine, what will that mean? That means when I come across sin, at least I'm going to try not to engage in this sin, which immediately brings towards me what? The mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We touched on this. So the human being, he comes across these verses. If you hear these verses and you got scared, if that fear is genuine, you really got scared, well, alhamdulillah, then the verses, they fulfilled their purpose. Because if you really got scared, genuinely, then that means at least I'm going to try to do what? To not end up in this place. And the moment you try that means what? Means when sin comes your way, nahan nafsa anil hawa. He's going to forbid himself from engaging in this sin. Even if sometimes shaitan tricks him. But his default is what? Nahan nafsa anil hawa. The moment that happens, well, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to come your way. Because the Quran said, Surah An-Nazi'at, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. The moment you fear these verses is the moment you find the doors of heaven are being opened up to you. So yes, if you left it up to you and I, we might sit here and say, let's skip over these verses. The Quran says, if that fear is genuine, that immediately opens the doors of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala onto you. And you see this beautifully in Surah Ar-Rahman. Surah Ar-Rahman, verse 43 to verse 50. The Quran describes the hellfire. Then he says, هَذِهِ جَهَنَّمُ الَّتِي يُكَذِّبُ بِهَا الْمُجْرِمُونَ. This is that hellfire that the wrongdoers fundamentally deny. Deny not because they didn't know, because they knew and arrogantly would continue to deny. Someone who doesn't know the truth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be merciful with him. يَطُوفُونَ بَيْنَهَا وَبَيْنَ حَمِيمٍ آن. These mujrimun, wrongdoers, because they denied, when they end up there, they have two options. One is boiling water, and the other one is the flames of the fire. Neither of these options are comfortable. يَطُوفُونَ بَيْنَهَا. They're going between these two options. Meaning it's all difficult. Yes? So you read this and you say, Ya Allah, I'm scared. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Verse 46 says this. This is talking to you. It says, by the way, if you got scared, this is my wording. By the way, if you got scared, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتان. If you got scared and now you fear the consequences of your deeds, well, great news. Now your path to heaven is opened. وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتان. You will have gardens in heaven prepared for you. Yes? But in Islam, understanding that my deeds have consequences is a prerequisite for me to receive the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a prerequisite. Shaykh, these verses are scary. Wonderful. That's the point of these verses. But know that the moment you get scared, if it's genuine and you're not just lying and you're not just saying it, deep down you say, no, I don't want to end up here. Well, wonderful. Now the Quran says what? The doors of heaven are opened up to you. وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ ذَوَاتَ أَفْنَانٍ فِيهِمَا عَيْنَانِ تَجْرِيَانِ. That heaven is for who? The one who has enough humility to understand that his deeds have consequences. The moment he takes this humility, this accountability, the doors of heaven now open up to this individual. Okay, so these people who end up in this place, Ashabu Shimal, what are the type of things that they did in this life? What are their characteristics? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to explain for us 3 of these characteristics. And the question that I'll pose, inshallah, I'll leave this for next week. These people who end up here, they end up in this punishment and all of this. Couldn't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given them another opportunity? Couldn't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given them another chance? God is merciful. Why doesn't He give them another chance? Why doesn't He give them another opportunity? Let's see what the Quran has to say about how many opportunities Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted to Ashabu Shimal. Ashabu Shimal, the people who their book of deeds are going to be given to their left hand, which, by the way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows ahead of time anyways. How many times did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give this person an opportunity? Is God like you and I, where we give people one chance, and then if we're really merciful, we say, we believe in what? In second chances. Second. That means how many chances you'll give to people if you're a really nice person? 2. Does God give people 2 chances? Let's see what the Quran has to say about how many opportunities Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted to Ashabu Shimal. Inshallah, that we will leave for the following week. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى اللهم صل على محمد اللهم صل على محمد الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأن عليا حجة الله صلى الله عليه وسلم حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله استغفر الله ربي الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى والعمل بما تحب وترضى. اللهم إني أسألك من قوتك لضعفنا ومن غناك لفقرنا وفاقتنا ومن حلمك وعلمك لجهلنا. اللهم صل على محمد وآله وأعنا على شكرك وذكرك وطاعتك وعبادتك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وأن عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله استغفر الله ربي وأتوب الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد سبحان الله لا إله إلا الله سبحان الله لا إله إلا الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله سبحان الله لا إله إلا الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما شاء الله لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Inshallah, recite Dua Wahdat all together. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لا إله إلا الله إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون. لا إله إلا الله ولا نعبد إلا إياه مخلصين له الدين ولو كره المشركون. لا إله إلا الله ربنا ورب آبائنا الأولين. لا إله إلا الله وحده وحده أنجز وعدا ونصر عبدا وعز جندا وهزم الأحزاب وحده. فله الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت ويحيي وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين. السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.